Hello and welcome to this month's Industry Insights. I'm your host, Leah Troscianecki, and I'm once again joined by my very good friend, Rick Vanover from the Tech Bytes live stream. Hey, Rick, how are you doing?
Hey, Leah, doing well. It's a beautiful Tuesday here in Central Ohio. Happy to be back on your show.
Absolutely. And it is a beautiful day. We finally are out of corn sweat season. If you don't know what corn sweat is, you missed our last show where I just complained nonstop about how much humidity there was in the Midwest due to a particular time of our farming season where corn literally sweats. You learn something new every day. Speaking of learning something new, we have a really fantastic show for you guys. Oftentimes I really like these live stream shows to be well researched, but kind of unstructured and off the cuff and more conversational. But that's not really how I would characterize this show. This show is very, very structured, and that's because we are talking about AI. This show is going to be all about how you can think about AI in the context of data resilience in your work, even in your personal life to a certain extent. And AI, because it is this whole world of possibilities, we think that it takes quite a bit of structure to figure out what are your desired outcomes, what are the capabilities that are in front of you, and how do you avoid doing things that mess stuff up, because certainly defensibility isn't as high as it may be with something that you are like logically following. And that's something we'll talk about with today's show. Rick, any kind of intro thoughts before we get into it?
I like your kind of three ways, both, what we can talk about on a technology stack. I think everyone as a corporate citizen should prioritize their own personal AI journey. And then even personal stuff, you can ask it for recipes, tell it what you have, what can I make? I've heard of people build vacations off of GPT's
I've done
recommendations
that.
and things like that. So it's actually pretty good. So I think that it's here to stay, but it's really important to be intentional about how to use it. Things like explainability, defensibility, super important guardrails to set. And I think it's the right time to prioritize these things.
It definitely is. And I know a lot of folks, if you spend one iota of time on LinkedIn, you've probably seen some sort of article about how AI is changing the work landscape and whether or not roles are going to be automated out, how you can augment your work. So we're going to hopefully give you guys a little bit of that language today. But I think, like Rick said, the time is now, right? The time is now for us to really contend with what it means to use AI in our day-to-day work. And again, we're going to give you some language for that. I keep wanting to jump into some of my fun examples, but I'm going to hold back because I have a very structured show for you guys today. So we are going to have some fun with that. But first, speaking of fun, you guys know that I love to start with a good icebreaker question. So today, instead of it being Star Wars theme or something else, we're going to make our icebreaker question all about Harry Potter. So let's go ahead and put up the poll question. If you had a Marauders map powered by AI, what fun or helpful thing would you want it to reveal? Maybe that's the nearest free parking spot, or maybe it's a coffee shop that has the shortest line. What would you want it to see? And, real quick here, you can see that I left an M dash in here. Justice for the M dash. As somebody who writes for a living and has a long, long background from an educational perspective in writing, it is very sad for me to see that M dashes are being killed by anti-GPT stances. And Rick, I think you taught me a term the other day, zero GPT. Did I get that right?
Yes, there's a tool I have fancied, Zero GPT. It's a counter AI tool. Like you can put some text through and ask how likely is it to be human produced, right? So I think that's actually an important thing because, I live in a world of trust but verify and things like that.
Yep.
So, you can have standard GPTs and other kind of text-based, even Copilot can do that. But then you also, in medical terms, when you want like a second opinion, you could use a second AI platform. And GPT-0, for example, is one. They'll let you do a few hits a month, and of course, it gets commercial after that. But yeah,
Yep.
that's one. And this M dash, is that the thing between reveal and like? Is that what you're referring
It
to?
is that. So you have an N dash, which is
Oh, okay.
short, and then an M dash, which is long.
Oh, wow.
Makes
Because
sense.
I'm a dasher. I'm going to
I'm
admit
a
it.
dasher too.
I'm a dasher, and our colleagues in the professional editorial team here at Veeam, they don't like it's not in the style guide.
No,
It gets nixed every time. And
I know.
one of our
As does the Oxford
producers,
comma.
Yeah, one of our
Justice for
producers
the Oxford
here,
comma.
Lady Megatron, is feeling my pain for sure. So
I know it's tough when you have to follow a style. And that is one of those kind of shorthands to figure out if something was written by AI. And this one was. I have a paid instance of ChatGPT. His name is Beckett. He is wonderful. He did name himself, if you're wondering. Highly recommend that you name your GPT. I think this is where you can have some fun with it. But Rick, when you were thinking about this icebreaker question, what kind of use cases were you thinking about?
I want to find buried treasure. Where is there like somebody dropped money outside of a bank that's safe and legal for me to pick up and steal? Or, is there something buried in my yard that is of interest? I would want that type of information.
And that takes a lot of context, obviously. We had Sarab on X say, that's a fun thought experiment. If I had a Marauders map with AI superpowers, I'd want it to reveal things beyond just who is where. And I'm in the same boat. When I was thinking about this question, immediately thought about a night out I had a couple of weeks ago where my friend and I were trying to debate a bar crawl. And we always require that we go to at least one dive bar because I don't want a lot of people. So I do want to know if there's less people somewhere because I want to be able to actually get a drink at the bar and
You
not
never
have
know
to
who
fight
you're
someone for it.
you never know who you're gonna see, Leah. Come on.
It's really fun that way. I also really want my Marauders map to show me where the live music is. I have to just compile so many different local websites here in Columbus to figure that out. And I end up just going to the same 2 or 3 places, but there's tons of other spots in town and it just takes too much work. We were sitting there with post-it notes and like debating things. I just want the Marauders map to know what I want and to create a bar crawl for me and my friend. I think that would be my favorite. Keep letting us know in the comments what you would like to use your Marauders map for. That is the beauty of AI, is that it really opens up a whole world of possibilities, and we're going to talk about those possibilities today. And part of that is going on a bit of a treasure hunt, as Rick kind of alluded to here. But to do that, every quest needs some tools, right? So when I was thinking about, putting this show together, I kept running into all these phrases that I want to use, but I worry that not everyone has this shared language, especially if English isn't your first language, then you have that to contend with on top of it. So we're going to level set with a couple of key terms that we think you should know, not only for this show, but frankly, any kind of interaction you have with AI. The first is going to be neural networks. And this was really like my first game changer in understanding what modern AI looks like. Neural networks are basically the back end of how any type of AI is built, whether it's analytical, predictive, generative, even agentic. They all have some concept of neural networks. And the idea here is if we're replicating human intelligence, i.e., artificial intelligence, then you have to think about things in terms of patterns. When you're first born, you are actually having the biggest explosion of neurons created in your brain. So babies are taking in inputs and they're learning more about, human faces and what expressions are good and what stimuli they need to respond to, like I'm hungry. And as time goes on, they start to build stronger and stronger connections that help them interact with the world. And then at a certain point, around the age of 5, our neural networks start to not grow as much. And in fact, you even start to learn something called pruning, where you're clipping things in order to be able to make connections faster. You don't have to take as many steps. So artificial intelligence, what it's trying to do is replicate that idea of learned experience, creating patterns and connections. So any kind of AI is going to have some sort of input. For generative, it might be written prompt. And then it will go through a sequence of patterns that it has learned using machine learning and then come out with an output. And that output might be right, it might be kind of right, it might be super wrong. And it takes a human today to figure that out, which we'll get to in just a second. Rick, anything you want to add about neural networks? I don't know if we can get better than my existential baby boom, idea here, but
Well, and I got a quote, and you'll maybe appreciate this. And when we map this type of mindset to AI, we're on a journey, right? This growth and these clipping, the just contraction and verification. And I've heard someone say today's AI is the worst AI you'll ever use. I think you might even say that again later. But no, this is really not something that I personally have really thought about. And, I identify more a couple other of these tiles of how I approach AI. But no, that makes sense. Nothing to add beyond that.
And the tools are going to build with this story because it's got to start big and then kind of work its way downward. So the second keyword that I want everybody to understand is the word context, which most people know the word context. But what we're talking about here is from a technical perspective, what does context mean? Ultimately, context is the way that we are applying artificial intelligence to specific use cases, putting the patterns in context so that it stops just parroting and starts building understanding, right? Sharpening the relevance and the meaning here. So think of something like you type in the word bat. Does that mean baseball bat? Does it mean Batman? Does it mean literally a flying mammal? The context around it can make a really big difference. And that's where the third term comes into play, human in the loop. This is another one of my favorite stories to tell. Back in the day when NASA was executing some of its first key missions, there was the Apollo mission. And there was an engineer named Margaret Hamilton. She was a software engineer, and she was responsible for guidance and control systems. The other engineers and scientists all felt that the Apollo mission was ready to go. They had programmed 10 sets of guidance for this mission. And they felt that no matter what, the context of whatever was happening for the astronauts on board would fall into one of those 10 kind of guidance systems. And Margaret said, no, I don't trust the computers to do that by themselves. I think we need to arm the astronauts with worst case scenario protocols. And they thought she was crazy. But ultimately, they allowed her to print out this massive stack of papers. And there's even a picture online you can see of the stack of papers being almost as tall as she is. And they put it on board of the Apollo, and guess what? They needed to use it. So she coined this term, human in the loop, the idea that we can trust computers all day long, but there needs to be a human in the loop. And especially for anyone who's maybe nervous about artificial intelligence or recognizes that there's a lot of misinformation and hallucinations that happen with the AI outputs, this is where that human in the loop concept comes in handy. And Rick, I know we're going to talk a lot about how actual humans with real butts and seats can use a lot of these AI tools to augment their work. Anything you'd want to add here about human in the loop concepts?
No, I mean, I think this maps really well to my bias to explainability. And I think it's super important because if you think about kind of the makeup of, the corporate world, Generation Z entering the workforce right now is the first kind of AI native generation. And, they don't have like a whole career behind them of whatever they're doing to base it on. So I like to put that human in the loop at that last output, right? And
Yep.
from an explainability standpoint. And I think it's just an additional perspective on it. But no, I think, now and then and later, I think the human in the loop concept, I think it will scale. I don't know if we need to be wheeling around a stack of papers as tall as each person, or how far and maybe less the human in the loop will be, coupled with the innovations we'll see. I think that this is an important concept. I call it explainability, but absolutely then what to do if not. And escape logic, that's another one that you could I love actually playing with the Veeam own AI. Best example I think I did it at Veeam last year, is I asked Veeam Intelligence why green beans don't have as much fiber as regular beans, right? And you would be really surprised it handled it correctly. But then I went to a different AI solution that we were working on at the time, and it actually just broke. Okay, so then you got to think about those types of things. Are we going to have a consistent experience, right? But human in the loop, QA, escape logic, explainability, all of that stuff, highly recommended.
Yeah, I think too, when you compare different models, some of them have looser concepts, and others have tighter concepts. Anthropic, for example, does something called constitutional AI, where it filters the output through their own constitution of ethics prior to it coming out. And, that's something that I've tried to start doing with my own interactions. I'd love to know from you guys in the chat, what is the stupidest, most incorrect answer you've gotten from a GPT tool? The other day, I was trying to get just a quick summary on a book by John Green, who has a brother named Hank Green. And in all candor, I can't remember which one is which most of the time. I know for a fact, though, I typed in the wrong Green name. And I said, book name, wrong Green name, please give me a summary. And the answer back just repeated the wrong name that I said. And I had to go back to Beckett and say, hey, man, you need to call me out when I type something in wrong. So let us know in the chat what you're getting is some of these really awful responses. There's been some pretty funny hallucinations that I've seen online. Would love to know in the chat what you guys have been seeing.
Oh, well, take my green bean example. That's one on like a text GPT, but I think we all can relate to some of the image generation
Yes.
examples early on. Why did everybody have several extra legs? And why does this, too little, too few fingers and things like that? So we saw a lot of that. We also had, I think still to this day, slightly misrepresented text and things like that, misspellings. And I think there's actually, it's because of some logic of, it's like some copywriting and things like that.
Yep.
So I think we all can relate, especially to some of the imagery.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I tried to have GPT create an image that was supposed to represent like the Force from Star Wars. And I got a lot of yin and yang symbols, which was weird. Fair enough, but weird.
That language,
okay, cool.
I don't know how to speak that language, and it's different every time I see it. So yeah, I'll go for that.
Right? I get it. Cool. Well, let's talk about stuff that we know when it's not, right? Something that it's not. And that would be entropy analysis. Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about entropy analysis? Because that was such a core function of one of our past releases of Veeam Data Platform that we really want the community to know about.
These are the simplest way to explain it. Now, this is a little bit of a Veeam lens. Our AI talk so far has been very broad focused, but the way that the implementation that we had as a productized implementation, which, not to shine my own halo, but I think is now going on 2 years in market. That was really around looking at patterns on image-based backups that were consistent from our own learnings of some of these advanced threats. It's the best way to explain it. And the only practical way to do that is on scale with, a AI, and I'm kind of blurring machine learning into this a little bit, and some of the different low-level disk patterns that go into stuff like this. But, when you think about some of the threat actors, they have some consistent behaviors across the different actors. And then you build on that. And, in that time, we acquired Coveware, and we got some really detailed learnings, which goes into some of the indicators of compromise detection. So when you think about a building block, this entropy analysis, this low-level pattern look, coupled with other kind of more characteristic and wildcard and patterning type of things, coupled with, and you really build on something that's really powerful. You could call it full circle and, a complete approach as well. But this is a very important building block of changes that may not at their face value look like much, but compared to some of the behaviors that we see with some of the threats, it's a match, and it's one of those things that would need immediate attention.
Yeah, it definitely, I think, signals when something is out of place, going back to that pattern recognition concept. And for those who are just joining us, by the way, this is our show talking about AI and specifically how it operates within the context of data resilience. But we're hoping to give you guys some good foundational knowledge that can help you navigate not only how to use AI with Veeam, but AI in the broader context of your work. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to one more definition so we can get into some use cases, but I wanted to share a really quick story for anyone who's feeling nervous about this age of AI. You may get called this derogatory term called a Luddite. And everyone who I've said this to has been like, what does that mean? Well, in the 19th century, English textile workers, specifically, I think Luddites were named after someone with the last name Ludd. They were in the textile industry, and they found that automated weaving machines were threatening their ability to maintain employment, i.e., what we're facing right now with the fear of AI automating out our jobs. And they actually staged a revolt where they smashed a bunch of weaving machines in this one textile mill, and it became this example of this anti-industrial revolution movement. But really what I think that people need to understand about that concept is this was really more about job security than it was about being anti-revolution, anti-industrialization, and in our case, anti-tech. So if anyone ever calls you a Luddite, just know that's a slippery slope. The flip side of that would be boomers, people who really believe that AI is going to boom and change the world and it's going to have all these positive outcomes. It is okay to be skeptical about those outcomes. We've talked a lot today about human loop and defensibility and explainability. We still see a lot of incorrect answers. So it's important that we're all recognizing that slippery slope in between. But let's go ahead. Now that we're armed with the tools that we need to understand AI in this context, let's talk about some of the use cases or outcomes that we think are going to be really common in our space, especially. So we're calling this the map, right? We started with a Marauders map AI Harry Potter reference at the beginning of the show for those who are just joining us. So we're going to keep this map motif going. And Rick and I put this show together focusing really on these primary use cases. Risk management. So risk means lots of things, not just cyber, but are you spending too much money? Are you making incorrect decisions that could have negative business impacts? If AI is primarily about patterns and pattern recognition, then it stands to reason that you can use those patterns to mitigate risk. So we can talk a bit about that. Of course, we are in the data operations space, and AI is all about data. So how can this help us make better decisions? Speaking of which, decision-making at large, right? This is something that can help us tremendously, especially as we look to build off of others' best practices. Rick was talking about this earlier with entropy analysis. We're always looking at the tactics, techniques, and procedures of these bad actors in the cybersecurity space. So how can we influence the community with this kind of information so that you all can make better decisions? One thing that we are definitely going to spend some time talking about, and I've got to double click into this, is called operator augmentation. You've heard me say this word automation before. And I know that someone in LinkedIn just asked, missed connection, what is a Luddite? So I'll go ahead and kind of circle back to that concept. The idea here is in the age of the Industrial Revolution, there were a lot of groups, including the Luddites, who were a group of individuals who worked in textile mills, who were worried that their roles were being automated out due to industrial revolution and due to machines. So now that we're in this AI age, this idea is coming back of job security being a very big fear. So what we want to do is highlight some of the ways that AI, especially within Veeam, is augmenting the roles. We really do not have a pessimistic view of the role of a backup operator in the future here. If anything, this is just going to improve the context and decision-making abilities of these backup operators. And finally, revenue acceleration. IT is a cost center. So where can you find these opportunities to make additional revenue for your business? And there's a lot of businesses looking to transform into that. Rick, I know we're going to double click into a few of these, but anything you want to spotlight here?
Sorry about the mute. I was all about reducing risk, including me coughing or sneezing while we're live. But one of these I want to highlight is the risk management. And I like reducing the risk in the sense of there's an incredible, okay, I'm pulling it back to Veeam a little bit. There's an incredible opportunity with this data fabric that we have, the backup data under management by Veeam. You can get a whole bunch of really cool insights from it, and we'll talk about that with basically no risk to the production estate, which is fantastic, right? And back to Sneha's question, one of the best examples, maybe not from the 19th century, is trying to get people off of typewriters, right? I used to have to fight that fight and get them on word processors. That we had Luddites even in the PC era, things like that. So I think that the risk and the other thing that kind of I think would overarch all of these is consistency. That's one of the banes of my existence, right? Consistency, consistency, consistency. And one of the things I think AI is really going to help provide is just a common language about an organization's data. So I really love striving towards consistency. So those are risk management and consistency, I think are super important in these spaces.
Me too. I think that balance of consistency with the art of the possible, that's kind of the yin and the yang, if you will, of AI use cases. So I think there's going to be lots of that peppered throughout some of our double clicks today. Let's go ahead and dive in first to cybersecurity being one of those big use cases, because ultimately cybersecurity is all about assuming breach and figuring out ways that you can fortify your defenses, but then also be able to recover clean and confidently, and using that word consistently. So I think this is where a lot of that consistency theme is going to come in handy. So if you've never explored any of Veeam's AI-powered capabilities, this is really a great time to do that, because there's a lot of different ways that we're going to be able to identify anomalies, unusual patterns. That word entropy is just another phrase for that. I'm oversimplifying because there's actual data science behind the word entropy, but nevertheless, it's all going to be about pattern recognition. And whenever you can identify something that looks anomalous, that's something to take a look at. But at the same time, there's so much signal noise, right? If you talk to any cybersecurity teams, they talk about alarm noise and just how much information is pouring in. You then need to be able to sort through it quickly and make decisions faster. You're also seeing a lot of these threat actors moving much faster. I saw a stat in Microsoft's Defense Security Report from 2024. So I think they're coming out with a new one soon. And it talked about how, on average, if a bad actor is able to get into a cloud-based workload, they spend, on average, 4 hours in there. So you have 4 hours to figure out that their entry was anomalous and to eradicate them from being there. Otherwise, they may be doing some kind of harm. 4 hours is not a lot of time. So it really comes down to being able to identify these risks quickly and efficiently, and also do it within context. And Rick, I know one of the things that we talked about in prepping for the show was how something Veeam is starting to explore is not just looking at anomalous behaviors of backups themselves, which is oftentimes a key indicator that you are under attack. I think it's like 96% of ransomware attacks, they go after the backups. But it's also taking a look at anomalous activity within applications specifically. So are we seeing bizarre activity within a virtual machine? Is it different in a database, for example? So that's something that I think comes in handy, as does the analytics-based risk scoring, because as we said, it's a lot of signal noise. So Rick, you spend a lot of time in the field, so does your team. This seems like a use case that everyone must be talking about.
Oh, alert fatigue is real, and there's too much going on. And I can give you countless examples, but let's take one. Unusual patterns, right? And sometimes there's simple things like a different account is doing something they shouldn't be doing. It may be allowed or permitted, but that's new. It's not normal. And then if that's a signal, then the human loop in there looks at that and says, why is that person doing something? Their account must have been taken over and elevated, so you can put these different characteristics together. The analytics-based risk scoring, I love this one. I have said for a long time, my beloved 3-2-1 rule of data copy management, to make this better nowadays and say 32110 rule. And I would go one step further and say, might as well make a 32120. And by having two immutable copies, by the math, you are very likely to drive recovery in an incident just by the math of that, right? So I love these kind of, it's not quite, probability and statistics, but it definitely is one of those very, very resilient techniques, right? So all these together give you plenty of different things to put together, but the only way to practically put it together is with AI.
And I think that's where we are trying to help provide that context as well. So it's not just a big ocean of information. On our previous show, we talked about the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And one of those big changes that we highlighted is how important Gartner feels immutable storage is within the backup category. So when you look at something like the decisions that Veeam made in the risk scoring model, that is in the Veeam console, you'll see that immutable storage is one of those key signals. And if you don't have immutable storage, if you don't have an immutable copy of a backup for one of your critical workloads, it's going to flag that as significant risk. So that's us trying to provide context as industry leaders so that you as an operator can make better decisions. So really good things to keep in mind. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat. Have any of you used any of Veeam's AI-powered capabilities for threat detection? And if so, what can you share about your experience? We know that it is sensitive oftentimes to talk about cybersecurity threats within an organization. So, totally get it from a best practice sharing perspective. But Rick, I know you spent a lot of time with our VM guards and in the community. So is this something that you have heard anecdotal evidence of that folks are using the threat detection tools?
Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely being used. And here's the best part is it is detecting things that the broader security investments that some organizations have put in place are missing. And so that's really interesting. Again, I've used that term like a medical second opinion type of thing. I love the benefit of multiple different perspectives. So I have one answer to this question, and I'm going to pick up Sneha's answer as well. And the one answer I have to this is Veeam Intelligence. This is one of the earliest productized generative AI capabilities that Veeam's had. I actually learned just recently, because of the nature of how it's constructed, we have like a 6-point flow from the response to Azure OpenAI to the agents. So it is agentic, retrieval, augmented, generation, and pure kind of classification terms. But Veeam Intelligence, because of its nature and the way it interacts with Azure OpenAI, it can actually be improved and enhanced outside of a product release. Ding, ding, ding. That's interesting because I asked it a simple question. I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if it can do this. And I asked it to make a Yara rule for detecting personally identifiable information within data under management by Veeam. So it would then allow Veeam to look through the backups for things like credit card numbers in plain text that shouldn't be there. This is very important, not just for data classifications, but again, that's also a threat thing. You don't want this type of data sitting in that type of form in that type of place, right? So get your head thinking about using AI to do other additional things. And I want to pick up Sneha's question. And by the way, I apologize if I messed up the name, but Banerjee, how do you integrate with any web app dashboard or different teams might have within the same organization? So I'll give you one example here. And that actually comes out of the security world, like Progress Flowmon. If you've heard of that, for example, that's an AI-powered analytics engine. And that's just one of like 65 integrations we have in the security space. A lot of them are processing all of these events with AI as well. It becomes, again, alert fatigue, information overload. So I definitely recommend if we have AI on both sides of these, there's going to be some learning. There might be some false positives, but humans are in the loop and we can train and tune that type of stuff. So I would just throw that out there, but check out some of the security integrations. Chances are that is one of the best examples of somewhere to start, but I'll flip it around and something like Veeam Threat Center is a great dashboard of our own that kind of rolls all of this up as well. So definitely talk to your Veeam staff there, Sneha, because those definitely resonate strongly.
And this is where I think, too, it's helping those data operations teams and the security teams work together, because the security teams are definitely going to want these signals in their own dashboard. They don't want to go to a million different dashboards, but they may not pay attention to a certain signal that, as a data operations person, is a strong indicator that something is wrong. So you both need the information in your own context. So let's talk more about that. I keep saying this word augmentation because I really think we as a community need to be talking about this more. The idea here is that I truly do not believe that we're going to be able to automate out anytime soon backup administrators. If anything, they've been in survival mode and executing day 0 and day 1 operations without effective day 2 operations. This is our way to bring day 2 operations into the fold in a more consistent fashion. So think of things like using the in-product assistance of Veeam Intelligence, being able to run queries in natural language, right? Because you understand the question that you want to ask, and you don't want to go into the help center documentation and have to really translate that in your own brain, especially, again, if English is not your first language. Something that has been around since before COVID even is something called intelligent diagnostics. Now, this is a machine learning function, but the idea is we can scan against knowledge base articles from our own tech support teams and identify common misconfigurations within the Veeam infrastructure. It can then alert you that common misconfig exists and recommend remediation actions using the in-product assistance. So this is a really great way for you to get ahead of some of the things that as a data operator can get in the way of not only achieving SLAs, but also keeping your environment secure from threat, because misconfigurations are usually the area where bad actors are going to exploit. We've had some really great interactions with the chat too. Robert on LinkedIn mentioned had potential ransomware alarms in Veeam 1. It alerted proxies a lot, and it had a dashboard that I can see with these predefined alarms. So again, this is Veeam putting things into context so that you can understand why we think there may be some sort of anomalous activity happening. Rick, I know that this is one that you guys on your team talk quite a bit about. Anything you want to add?
No, I was just quickly grabbing my phone to reply to Robert that you can adjust the sensitivity and the thresholds for that possible ransomware activity alarm. And actually, Robert, we've actually given this some thought on how is this alarm practically sitting next to the comprehensive inline malware detection? Do we have them both? And the current consensus is yes, because the possible ransomware activity alarm does not ensure that it is also being backed up and then subject to the inline malware detection. So in regards to the false positives, probably the best practice here is to tune the sensitivity up a little bit if some of your normal behaviors will trigger that. It's given me, I remember distinctly in 2022 when at the Veeam keynote, Kirsten Stoner had that exact alarm, Robert. And it's not so much just having it, but it's what you do with that alarm. And Kirsten had that alarm trigger a script to run a smart power plug to turn on a bubble machine and a light on stage. And if you can do that, you can also get the alerts and information to the right people as well. So I would recommend tuning that along with making sure that inline malware detection, which also needs some tuning, maybe some exclusions as well, that that can be really tuned just right for your environment, because it's hard. It's really hard to make base disk activity and network the only determinant. So it's reasonable to expect there would be some false positives.
And on that front too, these are things that the Veeam team put into place based on QA and customer feedback, but we now have the ability to be able to make a lot of these improvements using community feedback. So that was something actually we wanted to ask you all in the chat about. What are some of the queries that you have used within Veeam, the Veeam AI powered assistant, Veeam Intelligence, or what do you want to try? In fact, we actually have a community hub, and I know Rick is on there every day along with his team. And, a lot of the times we're asking questions that can become queries within the Veeam portal. So things like what Robert was talking about of having some maybe overdone sensitivity on the metrics, that's something that should go into that community and really be getting feedback from others on. So what are some of the top queries that you've used? Have you asked the Veeam community what queries they've used? Rick, I know you guys recently on the Tech Bite show did a whole show about some of the top prompts. So you want to share a couple?
I'll share probably my overall favorite, which is, what's been verified clean of threats. So what has been scanned with Threat Hunter? And Threat Hunter, for those who don't know, is a new capability where once a backup is under management by Veeam, it can be additionally scanned for signatures of known threats. And this is updated several times a day. And I really like Threat Hunter happening as a natural step right after the backup because there's no impact on production. You get an immediate data point of something being clean of some known threats, in addition to the inline scan, right, which is already quite awesome. So you have this like double data point. Veeam Intelligence is a prompt you can ask that will immediately tell you if something is known, what has been verified clean as of the most recent restore point. Now, if you're in an incident, that's an incredibly important data point. So that lets you know that those restore points are ready to go.
And I think that part of it is key, right? That time-bound need to get answers quickly. All of this new rich context that we have to sort through the information and data is so essential. Certainly brings us into the topic of the show here of how do you unlock all of this enterprise data that you have and be able to use it instantly for data resilience. It's almost like we wrote the title on purpose. I want to talk about one more use case before we just get into some futures here, because obviously we can't do an AI show without talking about futures. But first, I want to talk quickly about decision-making improvements. Now, we've mentioned a couple of times this idea of being able to get data from Veeam out, whether it's a backup, whether it's data from the Veeam console itself. And one of the really cool capabilities that we've had for a while now is called our data integration API. This is your ability to just get that information out and put it in context of other tools. Now, we have pre-built integrations with several vendors. Rick mentioned a few of them before in the context of our security ecosystem, but frankly, you can use any kind of tool. That's the beauty of an API. And if you've never taken a look at our data integration API, but you're kind of a coding nerd, highly recommend taking a look because it's been there for quite a while. There's lots of really good Swagger scripts and things like that available on the Veeam Community Hub. But this is where a lot of that art of the possible comes in to be able to make better decisions. And Rick, I know we're going to talk more about that, but are there any other capabilities in this decision-making category that we haven't talked about yet? Because I know we've talked about intelligent diagnostics and analytics risk scoring.
I have some ideas here, but none of them, I can't really share because we haven't committed on them. But what I would say is that the NLP-based queries is highly underrated because it truly puts it in conversational terms. You don't have to be an AI expert, and that's actually super important because every productized capability we've done really makes it ubiquitous to the end user, so the augmentation. But to be able to put this in plain terms is really powerful. Now, the plumbing is there. That data integration API, if you want to get crafty and codey, you can do. And that, I want to say, has been in the market since 2019, if memory serves me correctly. So I feel like wherever you are, your decision making could be as simple as at your fingertips in natural language, and it could be as advanced as whatever you want to, the limits of abilities, which is pretty attractive.
It's very cool. And I think you're right, Rick. I think it's been around since 2019. So it's definitely one that we have had available for a while. But the world of APIs are pretty rapidly changing. I heard someone mention something the other day that sounded a little like marketing hokey to me, but I would not be surprised if this person is correct. And that is the idea of model context protocols becoming the new app store. So think about it that way. MCP becoming the new app store. So what is an MCP? Well, MCP, like I said, is model context protocol being just like API, right? And the idea here is you can create a dedicated protocol server, an MCP server, that puts the data that you are feeding into it in context. And then that server can talk to other applications, other processes, other networks, whatever you may need it for. And I really think of this as an amazing way to think about revenue acceleration. We've talked a lot about how backup data is just sitting there. You have access to so much enterprise data at your fingertips, and it is just costing you money. We try at Veeam to make it cost a lot less because we do deduplication and compression and, automating your retention policies, but it is still a cost center. So the idea that you can crack open those backups and really look at them for a whole bunch of possibilities, again, the art of the possible, it's a really exciting time here. And again, this is bleeding into the future lens. So Rick, I don't want to, go too far into things here, but I know at Veeam we talked quite a bit about MCPs and how valuable we think they are. Do you want to add anything here?
No, we did announce a partnership with Anthropic, which is a model context protocol provider. And we showed an example of really getting some incredible insights from Microsoft 365 data, SharePoint data in particular, based or hosted in a M365 backup in Veeam Data Cloud. Now, I think it's available on our YouTube channel, but I just want to give you the context with the model context protocol, pun on pun. What Ben Young showed, take someone like me who knows how to use our product. And if I had to answer a question like what he did in those 3 minutes, that would have taken me a week. He was able to fit these into a 3-minute demo, which is wild, right? So we are going down a path here for the, and it's reasonable to expect it'll expand to more things. We have Veeam Data Cloud Vault. We have all other Microsoft 365 services that we protect. We have Entra. We have Salesforce. We have a lot of stuff, and our teams are very busy. So watch this space for sure.
And ultimately, I don't think we would even be able to tell you all of the different ways or contexts in which you could use this, because that's kind of what's beautiful about providing this capability to you all is your business better than anyone. How might you want to crack open this data and use it? On a previous show, and I'm just going to skip one of these examples for sake of time. On a previous show, I've had some of our folks from the governance, risk, and compliance space talk a bit about how challenging it can be to manage compliance at scale, especially when you're a bigger organization. On average, any given organization is sending data to 580 different vendors. So think about it like that, right? You are sending data to Veeam. I mean, it's not to us as a company, but it's within the context of Veeam's platforms. And you need to be able to make that available to your GRC teams. Well, there's oftentimes one, maybe two people on staff who are running the governance, risk, and compliance across all of these different vendors. That's a tremendous amount of information. So one of the ways that they try to make sense of that is looking at common controls. And there are a few common control frameworks. So imagine your internal GRC team is using one of those common control frameworks. They may even have a software that does that. But they're still having to go and look at SOPs and architecture diagrams and help center information to be able to pull out how you are using that tool, one of the 580 tools, right? So imagine being able to send data through the MCP and have it spit out in a way that is in context of common controls for GRC purposes. What an amazing benefit of being able to relate these things together so that your business can mitigate risk. That's compliance is always going to be my art of the possible example, Rick, but I know there's just a million different ways. Ben Young talks about this a lot. And if you don't follow Ben Young on LinkedIn or his blog, I highly recommend doing so. Any thoughts about the art of the possible with MCP?
Well, there's just too much data. And when you couple that with a lot of power, then GRC is going to come out of nowhere and bite hard. So the thought here is masking, handling this in automatically sensitive ways, which was also part of the example that Ben showed. So this is also something we're keeping, lockstep with every part of our journey here. And for those of you who are tinkerers or, curious, I would honestly recommend doubling down on that because, like I said, if you forget about it, it's going to come at you the wrong way and hurt. So the thought is going into that with this in mind is really a good piece of advice for right now.
And the Veeam community can help you out here, right? Because there's only so many possibilities that your brain can think about, but we have the benefit of the community behind us. So go to the Veeam community and let us know what your art of the possible might look like for MCP. There's a lot of MCP fans here within Veeam that would love to hear from you. And certainly we'd love to hear some of those, use cases as well, because the possibilities truly are endless. But with that, I know we've had quite a long show. Thank you guys so much for sticking with us on this one. We get very excited talking about all things AI between myself and Rick. Rick, thank you so much for joining me on this show. We have another couple of shows for the rest of the year headed your way. Our next one is going to be about data sovereignty. So stay tuned for that spicy topic that definitely goes into more governance, risk, and compliance territory, my personal favorite. Rick, thank you again so much. And audience, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.